and welcome. You've read Maximum City, and I'm sure you're awaiting the sequel. And perhaps this one is going to be It, translated by Jerry Pinto, set in around Bombay, but over a larger historical landscape, as it were. Jerry joins me to tell me about that and a whole bunch of other things that he's been involved with, including translating, writing, and writing some more, including on Hindi cinema. So let's talk about this book first, Jerry. It's promising to be, or promises to be, the next or Maximum City Part 2.
Yeah, I think that's one way of looking at it, Govind. You know, Daya Pawar's Baluta, it's called. And Baluta is an almost untranslatable Marathi word, which suggests the share that was given to the untouchables, to the Harijans, as they were called then, the Dalits as they are called now. And Baluta takes in that span. So, you know, at one point, the young narrator is talking about how he calls himself a Harijan, and people, you know, the people raise their eyes and say, the eyebrows and say, don't call yourself that anymore. You're now a Dalit. So it's a kind of like the identity is being shifted as well. So Baluta is this magnificent autobiography written by Daya Pawar, who practically sort of inaugurates the tradition of telling of the subaltern speaking in a way.
In an urban environment.
Yeah, he spends half of his life in the city and half of his life in the countryside. He often talks about being torn between these two places. How when he's in the country, he misses the date bread and the theaters, the cinemas, the excitement of Bombay. And yet, when he comes to Bombay, he recognizes that he's living in hell, because it's this magnificent landscape that he conjures up, because he says, his father works at the docks and his father comes rushing home every day to drink. And he goes off and, goes to the country liquor bar, and there's a country liquor bar at every corner, and each one of them is run by a Parsi. Okay. Now, suddenly the Parsis are placed in a space where you don't expect them, behind the bar of a country liquor shop. And then prohibition arrives. And the liquor business is taken over by, and Daya Pawar says it casually, by the Muslim thugs. And they set up their distilleries right next to the toilets. So one night a woman goes off to have a bath, and she's bathing in cold water, and she suddenly realizes there's this hot stream flowing over her, and it's one of the Muslim goons who's pissing on her. And this is just one of the anecdotes he tells you, and he passes on to another anecdote about albino woman who, sort of basically took a shine to him and would take him upstairs and make him massage her thighs. She's like, whoa! It's just an incredible story, and it is a total surprise that it has not been translated long ago. It has been actually translated into French and into Italian. It's been made into a film, but somehow the English world has been deprived.
And what's the time frame that we're looking at?
We're looking at between kind of 1930 and 1970. So that's kind of, it takes in the independence. He says the only thing he remembers about independence is that they got jalebis in school, Right. And from a child's perspective, that's probably what it was.
So, Jerry,
from a Dalit's perspective, it's even more, it's even more obvious that independence came much later, with the arrival of the Ambedkar movement, and with 1950 with the scheduled the scheduled tribes and scheduled castes being set down in the constitution. So it's absolutely fascinating. It could have been a very exotic book which talks about how we are so poor and we are so miserable, but it's not. It's as if he's a witness. He's simply standing there telling you what it was like.
Right. So, Jerry, the subject of Bombay is of interest to you and has figured in many of your writings.
I tweet under the name Mahim Ka Jerry.
Yeah, so that's Mahim in Bombay. Yeah. So, if you were to look at this book, and what does it bring out that maybe other books don't, or what?
Okay, I'll give you a lovely example. 1944. Okay, 1944. What happens is that a ship comes into Bombay's harbour. It's carrying this large quantity of cotton, gunpowder, and a few gold bars. Now, cotton has one property, that if you don't wet it regularly, it ignites on its own. So if you have a huge, large, like 2 rooms full of cotton, someone's got to keep going and spraying it, otherwise it just gets so hot inside, it catches fire. Now someone forgot to wet that cotton for 2 days. It caught fire, the gunpowder exploded, and the whole ship blew up. And
the gold went flying.
The gold went flying in the air, etc., etc. Now, everybody in Bombay started running away from the explosion. Everyone in Kawakhana, where Daya Pawar lived, began running towards the explosion. because they realize that an explosion means rubble. And rubble means things that you can keep looking through. You can find things to sell. You get scrap. You get waste. It's almost as if they're in that one simple example, you're being shown how two different cities can collide and coexist at the same time. One that runs away from an explosion, one that runs towards an explosion.
And yeah, let me build on that. So, Jay, I was talking to Naresh yesterday, who you've co-edited books with and co-authored as well.
No, not
co-edited. Right. So, what's happening to this city, Jerry? And I know this biography or autobiography to some extent depicts a certain period, but what's happening today?
You know what I think is main. I think in City Adrift, Naresh puts it well that what we are building is more barriers than bridges. And I think the problem is that that a city can only be built on bridges, in the sense that you can in a village, even in a small town, you can afford not to know anything about the people next door. You can live an independent life within your caste and your community and never have to learn another language.
Right.
Cities do not allow you such a luxury. Insularity is a luxury in cities. And as we drift away from each other, as people begin to get segregated, try to ignore the city, what happens is that as the middle class and the upper classes lose interest in the larger city, they lose the desire to militate into making it a better city. Because what they are doing is saying, we have our park inside our enclave. It's all right. Now we have a park. We don't have to worry about the parks of the city. So if someone takes over the parks, it's okay. That is, I think, the failure of the Bombay dream, which always was an egalitarian dream, which was always a syncretic dream. I mean, I think Vada Pav says it all. The pav is, when we say it, we even say it in the Portuguese fashion. We don't say pav. We say pão, which is with the aspirant n, which is a Portuguese way of saying bread. Pain is French, pão is bread.
And so is batata.
And so is the batata, which comes, comes to us from the Portuguese who brought it, and the Spanish who brought it from Mexico. So this easy syncretism with which we lived, which is exemplified, according to me, in Amar Akbar Anthony beautifully, where none of it matters.
And I was talking to Siddharth Bhatia, who's written the book on...
I was supposed to write that book. He wrote it just before me.
Because you preferred Helen over the whole...
No, you see, one of the I think Helen came out of the fact that at one point, I used to chat about cinema to people, and people would say, you should write a book about Bollywood. And I thought, no one writes a book about Hollywood, right? You write a book about a specific person in Hollywood, specific director, specific time period. So where is this idea of a big Bollywood book? And then when Ravi Singh, my editor at Penguin at the time, said to me, who can write about Helen? It didn't take me a second to say me. And as I went home that day, everything began to play into my head, that Helen represents, first of all, Christianity in Bollywood. And I've always wanted to say something about how Bollywood negotiates the space of minorities. Because you can mock the Christian and the Parsi. Why? They're not coming to your cinema. They are going to Hollywood. So you can mock them easily. You don't mock the Muslim. They're a big chunk of the population. They're a big chunk of people coming into and watching your cinema. This fades in the 1980s when suddenly, before the titles would always be, the title of the film would be in English, Devanagari and Urdu. And suddenly it became only English and Devanagari. Urdu fell off. Then there was another sudden wave where it began to come back when there was realization that in London, there's a huge Pakistani population, huge Muslim population, all of whom want to watch Bollywood, and all of whom are thinking, what happened? Where am I? Where am I? Where do I figure in this cinema? And suddenly that came back. That Islamic touch to the films began to come back. So in a full film like Bhool Bhulaiya, suddenly out of nowhere there'll be one Maula Mere Maula song. You're just like, oh, why do you put that in? Right, I know why you put that in. I know which audience you're talking to. And this is not a failing of Bollywood, I don't think. Popular culture has to be popular culture because it represents or talks to everybody in that.
So we were talking about Bombay, and Bollywood is also Bombay. So parts of Bollywood, particularly Amar Akbar Anthony, I don't know if that tradition continues, is also the good contribution, if one may call it, right, to the whole synthesis and everything else.
Oh, certainly, I completely think so. If you look at the 1950s and the 1960s in what is called the golden period of Bollywood, many of the filmmakers will talk about their responsibility towards building India. Okay, they're very clear that, Raj Kapoor took an ad in the Times of India where he says, "I made boot polish because I'm deeply disturbed by the notion of children on the streets." They were very clear that largely at that time we were comfortable with calling ourselves illiterate. Today we are much more comfortable with lying to ourselves about being a literate nation, when literacy is actually judged only by being able to sign your name and to read a few numbers and letters, which I don't think is what literacy should be. But at that time we called ourselves an illiterate nation, and these filmmakers would say, we have to be talking to them, we have to be reshaping the nation, we have to deal with things like caste, we have to deal with things like bhaichara, living together, coexistence, tolerance. These are important messages to be put out. So sometimes, of course, they were put out clumsily, ham-handedly, almost like they were moral preachments. Sure, but you don't know where those seeds are going and where those seeds are falling. So I think Bollywood's investment in building the nation has been largely underplayed and largely not understood.
Right. So let me come back to Bombay, and this book sounds interesting, but it also sounds like it could maybe viewed as a little scandalous, and that's not the point here. The point is that we're also living in an era of increased intolerance, right? And that's something that you've been talking about as well. How do we, or rather, where do you see all of this going, right? So there's increased intolerance, there's a need for more insightful and better writing and literature about cities, themes, periods, maybe Bollywood, and so on. So how does the creative expression find its right feet or its platform in this era?
One of the saddest things I think about writing, about Indian writing in English, is that so much of it happens at a distance. That I'm not saying that it's wrong or it's bad, that someone sitting in New York and writing about India is not going to write well. I'm not saying that. It's not my contention. I'm saying very often it seems easier to mount a critique when you're at a safe distance from the horde with the mashal, angered by a political party, roused for political parties to come in and destroy your house, because you've asked a simple question, because you've said something that people don't necessarily agree with about a political stance or a moment in history or a leader or whatever, they don't agree with it and therefore they get angry. Having said that, no one ever promised that writing would be easy. No one came up to me and said, writing's going to be a walk in the park, that's why you do it. I think writers are well aware that there are risks involved. We measure the risks against the rewards always. The reward is just the satisfaction of knowing that you came into this for self-expression, and for self-expression you will stay here. Because it isn't money. Writing doesn't make money. You went off to television, made piles of money there, unlike all of us. But I'm saying, no, writing doesn't pay. Writing will not, except in very few cases, make you rich. So I think if you do it because you want to be there. And so in some ways, that each time you push the envelope, each time you take that risk, you're pushing people into a slightly more accepting stance. Because, okay, you think about it, I was looking through Filmfare of the 1940s, and there's there's a photograph of this woman who's raised her skirt just a few inches above her legs to step into a brook of water, and the caption underneath said, the actress strikes a daring pose. And you're thinking, so that's daring, is it? But it was probably for that time a daring pose. And today, we still have, if a Bollywood heroine is going to kiss in a film, she'll still be asked about it. It's still, that kissing is still that slightly suspecting. Wearing a bikini, you will do only at the beginning of your career, and as soon as you're an established star, all the bikinis go. They're out of the window. So in the course of my lifetime, I have watched things change, both for the better and for the worse. I have seen that there is a much more, how should I say, aggressively active chatterati, if you want, and people, social media democratizes the flow of information, makes everyone into a commentator of a certain kind, brings a certain risk with it also, because then suddenly you find that you're at the receiving end of a barrage of insults, flames, and even physical violence without the protection of an infrastructure that a journalist might have or someone employed by a media house might have. So all these things will offer risk and reward. And I don't think, I'm terribly, terribly worried about the city. But I'm also fairly sure that we won't stop writing because there's intolerance, that we won't stop writing because there's a goon out there. A mad courage has been the badge of our tribe.
That's a good note to end on, and
Thank
a
you.
warm and encouraging note to end
Yeah.
on. Yeah.